This is the answer key for homework number 5, FIN499, Spring 2019. Task number 1 asks us to sort the data on 3 variables: the S&P sector, the valuation, where we'll have to create a custom sort list, and lastly, the market value. We'll start by clicking in the upper leftmost corner of our table and click on Data and then Sort. So our sort order is first by the S&P sector, and we're going to do that alphabetically from A to Z. Then we're going to add a level. The next sort is on valuation. Here we're going to have to create a custom sort list. To do that, we'll type in the sort order that we want. We want to sort as value, core, and finally growth. We'll add that custom sort order to the list. And then finally, we're going to add a third level, and we're going to sort on market value from smallest to largest. We'll click OK, and the sort will be performed. Sure enough, we see that all the consumer discretionary stocks are listed together. That's our first sort order. Then within there, we have the valuation. The cores first, and then the growth. If there were any values, they'd be last over here. And finally, within each one of those, we sort by market value over here in column D. That concludes task number 1. Task number 2 asks us to filter the entire table so that we see only the consumer staples and information technology sectors. Again, we'll click in the upper leftmost corner of our table. We'll click Data and then Filter. We'll filter the sector so that we only see consumer staples. We'll uncheck all of the items and just click on consumer staples and information technology. Now we see only those firms in our list. We're going to then auto filter so that we only see stocks with a market value between $30,000 and $60,000. So we'll come here to our market value drop down. We'll use a number filter, and we want to find values between $30,000 and $60,000. So we'll come here, it must be greater than $30,000 and less than or equal to $60,000. When we click OK, we'll see that our table collapses a bit because we're going to get rid of some of these firms that are not within the $30,000 to $60,000 range. So we'll go ahead and click OK. And there it is. All the firms have a market value between $30,000 and $60,000, and they're all in consumer staples or information technology. This concludes task 2. Task number 3 asks us to create an Excel table of our data set. We'll do that by clicking in the upper leftmost corner and Insert Table. Our table does have headers, that is, row 17 here has the name for each variable. So we'll click OK, and we now have a table. Then it says to create a total row using the built-in Excel tool. We'll do that by coming down here. We'll right-click on the last observation in our table, doesn't matter which column. We'll go to Table and Totals Row. Then we are asked to find market value, capital gains, PE ratio, and beta averages in our table. So we'll start with market value. We click in the cell just below the column or at the bottom of the column. Drop-down box appears. We tell it we want the average. We'll do the same for capital gain and loss. Get the average. And we also want a PE ratio and beta. So we'll come over here to the PE ratio, click in that cell, drop down to average, and finally for beta, we'll do the same. All right. Probably have a few too many decimal places there. Maybe we'll back off to a few decimal places. Sure enough, our average stock has a beta of 1. The last part of task number 3 is to calculate the stock price. Oops, looks like it's already been done here. Let me delete column M for us, and we'll do that again. So we'll come over here and create the variable. We'll call it stock price. And it's calculated by taking the market value of the shares that we own and dividing that by the number of shares that we own. We'll notice that Excel automatically fills in the stock price for the rest using this formula here. That concludes task number 3. Task number 4 asks us to create 2 pivot tables. One showing by sector the average market value, average PE ratio, and average beta for that sector. Then we want to create a second pivot table. This is very similar to the Morningstar style box, if you're familiar with that. It's a way of classifying stocks based on 2 factors. The first is the size of the company, its market capitalization. And the second is what's called a valuation measure. We have value stocks. These are stocks with low PE ratios. Growth stocks, they have high PE ratios, and the core stocks are somewhere in between. We'll start by coming over to cell A19 and clicking on it. It's the uppermost left corner of our data table. We'll click on that and then we'll insert a pivot table. We're going to create a new worksheet. Here's our data range already selected, so we'll just click OK. Excel's created a new tab called Sheet 2, and we'll start creating our pivot tables. So the first one, we wanted to look at the average of some variables by sector. So we'll take sector and drop it down in here into the row box, and now we see each sector. Next, we want to find the average market cap, PE ratio, and beta by sector. We'll grab the market cap over here and drop it down into the sum of values. Then we'll get the PE ratio and the beta. Again, we want averages, not sums, so we'll come over here to our value field settings and change each one to average, and then pick a number format that's appropriate. We'll use number. We don't really need decimal places. These market cap numbers are so large that decimal places would be meaningless to us. So we'll go with 0 decimal places, and our data formats nicely, and we do have the average, which is what we want. We'll fix these 2 now, the sum of the PE and the sum of the beta. So we're going to change the PE ratio value field settings to average, and then with a number format, maybe we'll go with 2 decimal places, should be good there. Do the same for beta. We'll click on its value field settings, average, and then change the number format. We'll go with 2 decimal places also on the beta. Okay, so here's our first pivot table. By each sector, we know the average market cap, the average PE ratio, and average beta of stocks in that sector. Next, we're asked to create a pivot table in cell A20 of the same sheet we created our first pivot table on that reports the sum of the percent of the ESG portfolio by firm size. That'll be our row variable and valuation. What we're creating is this table over here. This is known as the Morningstar style box. If you go to morningstar.com, they category or classify stocks according to firm size, large cap, mid cap, and small cap, and then by a valuation measure. Value stocks are those with low PE ratios, core stocks tend to have mid PE ratios, and growth stocks tend to have high PE ratios. So we'll click on the upper leftmost cell in our table and insert a pivot table. We're going to use an existing location. We're going to go to Sheet 2, cell A20, and drop our pivot table there. Okay, to create our pivot table, we want to take firm size and drop it in the row box, and then we want to take the valuation measure and drop it in the column box. Then we're going to take the percent of the portfolio and drop it into the sum of values. In this case, we do want the sum and not an average. We want to sum up the percentages so that we know what's the total percent in each one of these boxes. Okay. Let's change the formatting there. Since this is a percent, we'll give it a couple of decimal places. This shows, for example, that we have 3.78% of our portfolio in stocks that are large cap and value stocks. We'll try to center that one like the other ones. There we go. They will center all of these so that they look a little nicer. All right. This shows, for example, that we have 33% of our money in stocks that are large growth stocks. The right-hand column tells us the total, so 65% of our money is in large cap, 18% in mid cap, and only 6% in small cap. Likewise, we have about 9% in value stocks, 32% in core stocks, and 48% in growth stocks. This concludes task 4 and the answer key for homework number 5.